Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, November 11th, 2020, November 11th, Veterans Day, as we now call it. Having switched over, I was glancing at some news this morning, recounting the story of how we switched over at some point from Armistice Day to Veterans Day. And I'm not certain if there was an underlying complaint about that, but you can well imagine that there might have been, because why not? There are underlying complaints about everything. Okay, well, another interesting day on tap in the battle of the headlines, I guess. The battle of trying to shape the news via headline in a way that isn't completely misleading about the chances of what will happen next year with respect to who will become the president of the United States and presumably once again the leader of the free world. It's still a bit of a mess out there. But I guess things are winding down in terms of the viability of the various, certainly of the viability of the various lawsuits being filed by the Trump campaign. They're getting smaller and smaller in their scope and having less and less success with every passing day. It's actually quite encouraging to watch federal judges dispense with their complaints as obviously stupid and facially invalid, and having no hope of reversing the result that they thought they were challenging in the first place anyway, as was the case in particular in Arizona, as they, for whatever reason, have decided to challenge a number of ballots far, far smaller than they would need to reverse the result, even if that were something that they could actually do. Pennsylvania legislators continue to insist, if you believe them or not, and that's another ongoing story, is the level of trust that people have among one another in the country, I think, dangerously eroded over the years, and dangerously eroded certainly by Donald Trump and his, I don't even know if they rise to the level of tactics, but his toxic presence here in American politics. But yes, the Pennsylvania legislators seem to be, they are attempting to give every indication that they have no interest in designating a different slate of electors in favor of Donald Trump, or anyone else for that matter. And I guess we'll just have to wait until the period of the safe harbor period ends in early December in order to be absolutely certain that they never come around to doing this. But all right, it's interesting to watch. I'd be happy if this dissolves and falls apart piece by piece on the way. The White House continues on the same trajectory, though, waving around now apparently large stacks of what they claim are affidavits from poll workers. Evidently, if you thumb through them, you find that these are almost exclusively first-time poll workers, people who just simply don't know what goes on in a polling place and therefore think everything is suspicious, again, because we don't trust one another about anything. And this giant stack of affidavits, which is supposed to be, evidence of the large amounts of evidence that the Trump gang has put together in order to allege that widespread fraud had occurred, are stacks of affidavits of people saying, well, one time I went to the bathroom and then they wouldn't let me back in right away because, they said there were too many people in the room, or that there were the right number of observers in the room at the time, and I would have to wait until someone else left, and then they left, and then I went in, and that's terrible. Or they asked me to stand 6 feet away from the people counting the ballots, and I couldn't see very well from 6 feet away, but we're in the middle of a pandemic, and even outside of a pandemic, you're not really allowed to just drape yourself over the back of a poll worker. So really, minor league complaints, things that are routine, made up the bulk of this giant stack. I guess there were a few things that you might want to look into somewhere along the line, but very often resolved by consulting with people who have actually spent time inside of a counting operation before, and they'll tell you, no, that's actually the way it always works. And, no cause for alarm. Anyway, so that's the bulk of the news in terms of the ongoing Trump supposed challenges to the way the outcomes are supposed to go. Still working through dealing with what kind of chaos Trump can cause, but it's becoming increasingly clear that the only end game he could really have is to say, well, I love chaos and I want to see a lot of it on my way out the door, not so much weighing in favor of the idea that, well, there's a real viable path, even if it's very low percentage, viable path of installing Trump in a second term of office. So the I don't know what, the locus of people's fears probably should be shifting at this point, and that's good news. But other opportunities for trouble or making still exist, and well, we don't want that. We wanted a peaceful transition, and I guess peaceful is a relative term. All right, well, Greg Dworkin has been collecting his raft of stories, and we'll go over some of them this morning, and then, of course, the added bonus of Denise Alvarez. We've lined that up at Greg's suggestion. We're going to head back, we'll go back in time to a few days ago when we began trying to digest the data we were getting in terms of turnout and voting performance among the wide and varied, what we're calling the Latina community, thanks to the helpful suggestion from Gil Aquino, who's come up with that term, and I have found none better, that's for sure. Slow in getting other people to adopt this thing, though, but I'll continue to evangelize and spread the word on that one. I think it's at least, at the minimum, is a lot more pronounceable. And, but we would like to parse the information we're finding. It's valuable. You want to know what you're talking about when you head into the next election, and it's time to start thinking about that one. I think we've done everything we can to buffer against the charge that we somehow consider the community monolithic in any way. So, if we haven't gotten that point across to you, it's true, and we don't believe in that. That it's monolithic and that everything is explainable one way or the other. But there's a lot of things we can figure out from what we know about the variety and differences among the various, I refer to them as various communities, both different in their ethnicity, in their background, in how long they've been in the United States, by generation, by age, by location, geographic location, where they settled, where they came from, when they came from there. It's almost as if they were individuals who had their own reasons for doing things the way they did. And, they are. But you know how it is in analyzing group behavior. Well, if it was all down to parsing it down to the level of the individual, that granular level, well, we'd never get anywhere. So, all right, let's see. That's a topic of conversation. The pandemic obviously continues getting worse. I don't think we've minced any words in pointing that out. The numbers breaking new case records daily at this point. And rising to levels, in terms of new case counts, to levels we've never seen before. And some of that might be thanks to testing capacity that we have never had before. That's true, but it's not causing the disease. That's the difference between us and Donald Trump in terms of analyzing what information these diagnostic tools are able to give us. But also rising levels, unfortunately, of death from COVID-19, which it looked like we had tamped down on for quite a while, and I think a lot of that had to do with our finding the ability to put more distance between us and practice better social distancing when the weather was warm, and perhaps things turning in the other direction there. But also, now I think coming home to roost, of course, is some of the upper Midwest and mountain state insistence that they were just never going to get this disease, and or that their leadership didn't have it at the moment and therefore no one was going to get it, or it was being hidden in the meatpacking plants where those people worked, and they didn't seem to trouble the rural Trump voting population and cross over very much, and so they just didn't believe that it was the case. They bought into the propaganda, perhaps the QAnon wackos, and following their idiot governor in South Dakota, Kristi Noem, who believes she's destined for the presidency based on murdering the vast majority of our latest deaths from COVID-19. I understand both North and South Dakota bumping up against full capacity in their hospitals and intensive care units. So, well, that was never going to be difficult to do because the capacity was never all that high. But, you know, it's a low population place. But guess what? They found a way to get to that critical point and put enough people in the hospital that there's a real possibility that another wave of COVID patients is just not going to find a place in the hospital if they need it. So keep an eye on rising Republican star Kristi Noem as she barnstorms around the country telling everybody how qualified she is for president while her state is almost entirely hospitalized is basically how you'd have to put it at this point. All right, well, good morning to Greg Dworkin. Hi, how are you? Happy
Hi,
Veterans
a little late
Day.
today, but here we are.
That is okay. We can live with that. Mentioning to everybody, we'll call Denise in just a bit. But,
Yep, and that'll
I'm sure
be
there are a
fun.
few things you want to run through.
Well, you know, I think just quickly before we give her a call, the pundit roundup I have today is basically the post-election game and how it plays out. And in fact, one of the things that I mentioned on the pundit roundup today was maybe a little Shakespeare.
Oh,
Because
okay.
I think Bill Shakespeare is one of those electors in a swing state.
Yes.
And, he said, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frisks his hours upon the stage and is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That's about what we have with the Donald Trump, you didn't win, I win discussion.
That is a tale told by an idiot.
And full of sound and fury and signifying nothing. Everything's going to be certified. Biden's going to be the president. This isn't a coup. It's handling the distraught feelings of a narcissist and a child who happens to have his finger on the nuclear button. So, give him a little space.
Sure, I guess so.
This is BuzzFeed News. We spoke to 11 members of the Electoral College in swing states. Nearly every one does not buy the GOP's baseless efforts to undermine the election results. They have the following message for America. Joe Biden won.
Oh.
Calls from foreign leaders continue to pour into Joe Biden, including from Erdogan.
Oh, yes.
It's not a
Trump
coup.
is
It's not an
furious.
autogolpe, which is a Latin America term for when you're already in power and then you just seize the powers of the other branches. It's not that either. We have huge banner headlines in the New York Times today, which I guess would therefore influence the 538 projection of who will win. It says election officials nationwide find no fraud. And they've basically checked everywhere with every state, and it doesn't really make a difference.
Yeah, well, there isn't any. That's true. The Organization of American States apparently had some observers here, and their report is out. No irregularities to speak of. They were actually invited by Trump for some reason. I didn't even know he knew that there was an Organization of American States.
There was
Probably
actually
thought that they
two
were
separate
actual
organizations
US
that looked and
states.
said nothing.
Yeah, because there's nothing. But,
Right, and Brian Schatz, who's a Hawaii senator,
yes, right.
tweeted this morning, which I think is true, looking at those headlines. It just occurred to me that Trump's refusal to concede means that every day the story is that he lost. So every single day he gets to lose again.
It's
every
kind
day
of fun.
that this goes on and he doesn't concede is another day where he has to wake up and said, I lost.
Yeah, now he has to wake up and
can't
say
move
that
on.
every day anyway. But this is good. It's an additional insult as far as I'm happy to have it happening. By the way, just for the Canadian listeners, I am reminded that it is Remembrance Day, not Veterans Day or Armistice Day in Canada. So if you're listening there, or if you're listening there as an expat, you can come home soon. Biden will be president.
Right. That's a good thing. The Arizona data guru, Garrett Archer, who's been tracking Arizona, says, There's two totally empirical and data-based observations I can make here. One, it's become obvious to me the only reason the remaining decision desks aren't calling Arizona is to juice my follower count to over 100,000. And the other is I can't use my phone for 15 minutes after posting something. That's the observation.
Oh.
So he, called this several days ago and said, look, it's about 12,000 Biden lead. If all the votes come in, and eventually they will, it might knock it down 2,000. So that'll be a 10,000 Biden lead. It's above the recount, 0.1%. So Arizona is going to be Biden's. Georgia's going to be Biden's. His lead is over 10,000 there now. Obviously, Nevada is, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. They keep looking. And all of the depositions and court cases, and there's one in Michigan, I think, basically the complaint about voter fraud is that they made us as observers for the Republican Party stand 6 feet away from people in the middle of the pandemic, and besides, they were mean to us.
Yes, that was an interesting complaint too. Every so often they were upset that they harassed the poll workers, and then they would get themselves ejected from the counting room, and the poll workers would say to the police or whoever was taking care of things, "Hey, thanks. That's good. I'm glad this person who's harassing me is being kicked out." See how mean that is? It's just
right.
So disturbing.
And, in the few minutes before we called Denise, despite what Donald Trump says, the election he lost to Joe Biden was not tainted by widespread voter fraud. AP explains why the election's validity is intact regardless of Trump's claims. Give you an idea how it's going. The Drudge Report is leading with Biden now up to 50.8% of popular vote, topping Reagan's 50.7 in 1980.
Yeah, okay.
It's the highest percentage for a challenger since FDR in 1932. A reminder, Biden flipped 5 states and won by what's going to approach 6 million votes. Is that good? On an incumbent.
Okay.
Because we still have
yes, right.
in Jersey, New York, and California to finish counting.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, they take their time all the time.
They do. So, that's a story. So don't lose sleep over the perceived wresting of power from Biden. That's not happening. What's happening is a drama that's playing out in real life. And it's going to take a while. And November 30th, it was when Arizona has to certify. A lot of the other states do as well.
All right.
And we go from there. So that's the summary.
Well, that's a pretty good summary. I think that sums it up pretty much where we are. All of the various affidavits that looked like they might be something more than just routine complaints have likewise fallen apart. The big one that everyone was hanging their hat on, Lindsey Graham, for instance, hanging his hat on, a postal worker who told, I guess, James O'Keefe's operation in exchange for, I think, a $25,000 reward from O'Keefe's organization that he had witnessed something terrible. And he had a whole story about it, and it sounded like a terrible thing. It wasn't really actually all that bad of it. I mean, it would have been fraud, but it didn't seem to change the outcome of the election in any given state or district in any way. But the postal inspectors asked him some questions, whereupon he recanted everything, and also apparently revealed that he had been paid $130,000 in total by various right-wing organizations I don't know whether it was to produce this affidavit or after producing this affidavit.
It's just fantastic that these right-wing Republican organizations keep coming up with examples of Republican voter fraud.
Yes, right. Well, it's helpful that they do that, and I'm glad they're putting their own money behind it. And I wonder whether the guy has to give back the $130,000. He could say, yes, he does.
It's a
finder's fee. The check is in the mail. I have already. Don't worry about it. I've given you the money back. That would be a great excuse. I don't know whether he's going to go with that one. But all right. Well, if we're ready, let me give Denise a call. She indicates that she's standing by.
Yay!
And we can begin the Inquisition. We probably should not call it the Hispanic Inquisition because it's not about that. But the name lends itself. Well, let's put it there just to reject it. Okay. Let's start the process here. All right. Add to call. That sounds like the sort of button we would want to press on this. I don't know whether it's going to make any interesting sound effects or not, but if so, we'll just... I'm waiting for them, but we'll wait until we hear, hello, I'm here, and then we'll see how that works.
Okay.
I'm waiting for, I would think we'll be making some sort of interesting sound here.
Only if it's working.
Yes, right. Well, yeah, that's true. One of the interesting sound I'm looking for is Denise, actually. But all right, well, I've come. It says it's calling, and I don't know whether to believe it or not. But
It could be true.
Yeah.
So let's talk maybe just a little bit about our very talented guest to be, Denise Alvarez, who's actually lived through quite a bit, including helping to put together back in the day the Young Lords. And Denise, are you on the line? Among many, many other things, she also is, professionally, academically speaking, an anthropologist, and also an expert in women's studies. So I just thought that given the questions that had come up about the Latino vote over the last election in various and sundry states, it's just such a complex issue. I'm certainly not the one to give the last word on it. No one person is. But looking at it from the point of view of an anthropologist and an Afro-Latino breakdown and men versus women, I just thought Denise was a unique person to give us a perspective on this.
Well, let's give it a try here and see. It indicates that she may be here. Now, Denise, are you with us?
I think I am.
You certainly are now. Now we can tell for sure.
Okay. Did you hear me say anything about you?
Wonderful things.
Good.
Not a word.
I will start with this, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is Veterans Day, and if I remember correctly, your dad was one of the original Tuskegee Airmen. Is that right?
Yes, he was.
I did not want to forget that, and I did want to acknowledge that.
I wrote about him on Daily Kos several times, and I just posted a series of tweets about him because he had a unfortunate history as an airman. He was beaten to a pulp by racists. Going back to the base, he showed up at the bus station with another airman, and my dad had blue eyes, etc. So a bunch of racists thought he was a white guy with this black guy, and they started screaming N-word lover and attacked him, and he was hospitalized. So the guys on the base heard that he was dead, that he had been killed, and they got into their half-tracks and whatever and armed up and headed toward town to blow it off the face of the earth.
Wow.
And the officers had to go to the hospital and drag my father out on a stretcher to show that he was alive. And the upshot of that was my dad was charged with inciting a riot and thrown into the brig.
Yeah, I mean, how dare you put your face in front of my fist?
Man.
Yeah.
That's some story.
The piece that I'm going to give David. I mean, you may have another one you prefer, but this is back in June of 2019. You wrote Tuskegee Airman, actor and activist, a Father's Day tribute to my dad, which I think is just a beautifully written piece. So again, given the day, I want to acknowledge that.
I also put a post up which is about my ancestor who served in the Civil War, who I'm named for, actually. So that's up to date, too. The colored soldiers who fought and died for freedom, who tend to get overlooked when we talk, considering that now we're having lots of discussions about Civil War due to that guy, the orange guy. I started thinking back and decided to repost an earlier post about the Civil War veterans in my family.
That's great. So now we have something to read, when we get off the show. The topic that I wanted to talk to you about, though, is this most recent election and the complexity of the Latino vote, Afro-Latino vote, men versus women. And I just wanted you to put your anthropologist hat and your life experience hat and give us some takes on that. I had two particular pieces I was reading. One is from CNN, Democrats assess efforts to engage Latinos after mixed election results, and how different states wound up doing different things. And this really interesting one from Jack Jenkins in the Religion News Service about how Trump's strong play for Hispanic evangelicals helped him stun Biden in Florida. You don't have to comment on those particular pieces, but I just love your take on like what's been going on.
Yeah, thank you. I want to make clear to anybody who's listening, I am not Latina.
Right. That's a good starting point.
And a lot of people assume that I am, primarily because I have a long history as an activist in the mainland Puerto Rican community. But and I'm also married to a Puerto Rican. Right. And Puerto Rican history and culture is something that I focused on, or Caribbean history and culture, as an anthropologist, and have worked on the island, and have a lot of ties there. So I do have, I guess you could put it in informed perspective, but I cannot speak for people who, exist under that variable called Latinos or Hispanics. And there's where the problem lies, because there's no such thing.
Sure. You know what? We're running up against our first break, but that gives us 2 minutes to sort of give ourselves a moment to regroup and plan as we forge ahead. We got a good half-hour block ahead of us as we return with this subject. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Still with us, Denise Alvarez and Greg Dworkin as well, and we're prepared now to shake it up a bit and talk about we got a lot to talk about, but the Latine, I love that interesting new term, Latine and Hispanic vote, and how there's really kind of no such thing. And we kind of have to approach this very differently if it's something we want to understand. And Denise has got a unique understanding of it. There are many others. And by the way, the door is open. I invite a lot of you who comment on the proceedings in the show. I think working up the nerve at home to either join us on the show, send us a pre-recorded segment, sometimes written essays. I'd love to have those and share them, especially if you feel like there's a perspective on it that we've missed. But for the moment, Denise has always had plenty to say on this, and let me open up the floor for you here.
Right. I mean, if we were a cable network, we'd basically say to Denise, listen, we would like your opinion on what America thinks. You have 20 seconds and 15 words. Go for
it. No way. This is so difficult because we're, as people who are concerned with elections and politics and polling and demographics and variables and all that wonderful gobbledygook, there has been a mistake made from the beginning of this kind of analysis, once people started talking about the Hispanics and the Latinos and, oh my God, and the Democrats and the Republicans, and I'd say that probably about 90% of what I see written and talked about and whatever is garbage. It needs to be thrown out. I mean, some of the more detailed analyses, you can look at Pew Research. But because they break things down into regional categories, they look at religion, they look at, economic status within those categories, and they look at ethnicities, and that's a big category. But I just saw the Wall Street Journal has something up screaming about Democrats losing Texas and why, and all the Hispanics in Texas who voted for Trump. And except I couldn't read the article because I ain't paying them any money. So, but I figure it's more of the same, and what's wrong with Democrats, and they don't know what they're doing, and oh my God, if you only just had better outreach. It's sort of like if you only had just better outreach to some of those hardcore Trump voters, they would turn around and love Democrats. What makes them think that there are not segments of a category, artificial one called Hispanic, who are any different from that category called those white people,
yes,
who are maggots. And what makes the difference is, oh my God, they're Hispanic. What's wrong with them? Trump doesn't like them. What makes anybody think that category that votes for Trump has any great love for Democrats, for a party that has a huge support base that's Black American, that champions women, that does a whole lot of things. And throw the religious thing in, I've seen at least 30 or 40 comments at Daily Kos where people say, I know it's because they're all Catholics. And, I grew up in New York, and Puerto Ricans in New York, New Yorkers, meaning ones that came over here in what was called the Marine Tiger migration out of Puerto Rico they were forced out of Puerto Rico starting in 1947 and beyond, settled in neighborhoods that were primarily mixed or had a large number of African Americans, like Harlem. Okay, you hear Spanish Harlem. Well, it's full of also a lot of African Americans, and they married each other and hung out together and fought. And they're Catholic. And guess who they vote for? Democrats. Okay. They are also heavily involved in major unions, basic worker union, particularly health workers, like 1199, SEIU. And their Catholicism never got in the way of voting for Democrats. And frankly, the anti-abortion message from the Catholic Church tended to get ignored. They still went to mass. So I don't buy they're Catholics thing. Now the evangelical portion.
Yes.
And
different.
I have great familiarity with the fanatical sort of evangelical community, and I don't want to put all evangelicals in the same box, because Reverend Barber, for example, is an evangelical. So you have progressive ones, but we came up against a very, very right-wing evangelical church in East Harlem. The pastor was actually a Cuban exile, so you know how he felt about a lot of things. And he labeled all the Puerto Ricans in the area Satana. hijos de diablos, children of the devil, Satan, drug addicts and prostitutes. Stuff. And I mean, you have to get a sense of, but he was one of those people that fled the Castro regime, and he was also a white Cuban. Yes. And the population of East Harlem was very heavily mixed or Afro Puerto Rican or Indio Puerto Rican. People that physically look like they have some indigenous ancestry. Now, that's New York Puerto Ricans. However, New York Puerto Ricans are not the same thing as Florida Puerto Ricans, many of whom didn't arrive until starting about 20 years ago. Many of whom relocated from the island to the mainland with the money. They weren't forced off the island.
Okay.
They moved, many of whom are retired military. Many of whom are retired military who are Republicans. Many of whom moved to areas where they then developed relationships to the already existing hardcore Republican Cuban exile community, and some of them intermarried, and many of whom practice not only Catholicism but practice Lukumi, Santeria.
Really?
Which is, oh yeah, I know, because many of them are my religious relatives in Florida. It's one of the reasons I don't visit them.
Okay.
Because there is a level, interesting, because this is an African diasporic tradition in which the practitioners deny that it has anything to do with black people.
Okay.
Put that hat on. Okay?
Yeah, didn't know there was such a hat.
Well, because nobody wants to. Okay, this is a really difficult topic to address, particularly when you're organizing and you want to get out the Latino vote or the Puerto Rican vote or the whatever, and you don't want to, you'll discuss the same way that they do all those interviews with people in diners. We're talking about, I voted for Trump because of economic insecurity, right?
Yes.
So when they go and interview Hispanics or Latinos, you get the economic message, you get the religion message, you get the whatever message, and rarely do you get messages that talk about people's prejudices and attitudes. And what is really interesting, though, is that a number of newer, younger academics who study Hispanics in the U.S. or Latinos, or the term, of course, for all the young academics is Latinx, right?
Yes.
Are beginning to have those kind of discussions. There was a really long thread on Twitter the other day, which I found very interesting because it was someone who is, her name is Esmeralda Bermudez, and she had a long thread. I posted it over to Daily Kos, and she opened with this. It's laughable that in 2020, this country still needs to be reminded, Sesame Street style, that Latinos are not a monolith and that the Latino vote is a mirage. This misconception comes from the fact of how little you bother knowing us, how superficially you cover us, and how absent we are from newsrooms. And then she goes on and she starts to list all of the reasons. She says, Latinos can fall all over the political spectrum on just about any given topic. She talks about geography. and how there are differences in geography. But when she brings up religion, she doesn't just do evangelical Catholic, you know. She said there are a gazillion interpretations of La Virgen and Jesucristo. She said you've got Latino Jews, Santeria worshippers, curandero believers. Now, curanderismo comes out of Mexico. You've got atheists, agnostics, and then she goes right into skin color. From the moment you're born, your skin color, eye color, hair color determines where you fall on the spectrum of real and perceived Latino racism that vastly impacts your lot in life and your views of the world. You don't shed that impact of this racism when you move to the United States. She then talks about generational differences. She talks about where people are situated on the work scale. You know, people assume Latinos are either agricultural workers or work in the service industry, but then, you know, nobody's looking at business owners and doctors and lawyers and language, your accent. I got sent by Daily Post a couple of years ago down to Austin, Texas. And I said, I don't know why you're sending me to Austin. You know, I opened my mouth in Spanish and I speak New York Spanglish, you know. I have no idea how to speak Tejano. And I know that from past experiences going to sort of mixed Hispanic conferences. I know that from going to Puerto Rico and showing up in Puerto Rico to meet with political leaders on the left in Puerto Rico. And I remember saying, I'm going to address you in Spanish, but then I'm going to speak English because, you know, English is my primary language and I'm Black. And the response was, that's what's wrong with you New York Puerto Ricans. You all run around here saying you're Black. And I said, no, you don't get it. I'm not a New York Puerto Rican. That's what's wrong. I mean, and this was a grouping of all leftists.
Yeah.
Okay?
You can run into that.
So I'm thinking maybe sending a 20-something organizer from the Westchester, New York suburbs down to just do this in a couple of weeks, and putting some ads on Spanish-speaking radio may not do it.
Right. And it doesn't. And it means you have to have, one, people who are from a particular community, and you have to have people who are from different, what they call niveles, different levels in that particular community. Just getting your 21-year-old leftist community organizer that got involved with the campaign may not do anything toward approaching some of the abuelas, some of the grandmas, you know. It's going to require hard work, a lot of very specific understandings of things in local, you know, who's always saying politics is local. And it is. And in our push to grab this vote, just like in our push to on daily principles. Yes, Puerto Rico voted for statehood. They should be a state. Then we'll have 2 Democratic senators. And I'm like, no, you'll have 2 Republicans, you know. Well, how could any Puerto Rican be a Republican? Well, how can any Republican here on the mainland be a Republican? You know? If you're, I'm sorry, I'm just saying if you're part of an elite, I think that we have this idea Hispanic does not equate with elite.
I want to follow up on that elite idea. I pulled something from that Wall Street Journal piece you mentioned, the one behind the paywall, and I want to read a couple of paragraphs and get your reaction.
Thank you.
It says, let's see. The group was trying to figure out, the Democratic group down there was trying to figure out exactly what happened. What seems likely was that Democrats didn't counter Republican messaging on three issues important to Latino voters: pandemic shutdowns, oil jobs, and abortion. Aside from Mexican heritage and Spanish surnames, much of the Rio Grande Valley has more demographic similarities with Trump's strongholds in white rural communities than the nation's urban areas. Many South Texans live in communities with lower income, lower education rates. In Starr County, just over half of its 65,000 residents graduated high school, and the unemployment rate of 18.5% is the highest in Texas. It's ethnically homogeneous, rural in parts, deeply religious, intensely patriotic, socially conservative, and hurting economically. That's what I want to get to in terms of the elites. There's a lot of parallels between a community that's 96% Hispanic and a community that's 96% white, said Freddy Guerra, a former mayor of nearby Roma. Racism isn't something people deal with here because everybody's brown. Climate change isn't real. They prefer bread on the table. That's the poll quote. So it's about economics. It's about what we're interested in. We're hurting, and let's say pandemic, closing down and lockdowns hurt us. We're against it. That kind of thing.
Do either of you have a map of how Texas voted?
I saw one just this morning. I don't have it in front of me, but with a tiny little tip down south. Compared to, and it was a look, I think it was from the upshot of which communities went blue and which communities went red, and the size of the arrow showed you how much.
Because I'm looking at one that Politico posted.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And interestingly enough, I'm looking at the southern portion of Texas, and I see blue.
Yeah, it is.
Except for the tiny little piece that's down way south. But I'll try to find that map.
I understood that it actually largely did go. In fact, overall, it is blue. What they were making this, I guess, the mountain they were building out of a potential molehill seemed to be that, well, a larger portion of the Rio Grande Valley voters than other people expected to vote for Trump did, in fact, vote for Trump, but it's still blue.
Yeah, but here's the other map that shows shift, which is different than how they voted overall. And I just sent that to both of you.
Okay. I see what you mean.
I don't even know how to pull that up on.
Just click on it and it'll grow.
No, I don't have the screen.
Oh,
listen,
okay.
You're dealing with somebody who's 73, and Skype is a new adventure for me. All right.
So, brilliant, and you could learn it if you want. But what it shows is analyzing the vote in battleground Texas, and it's the shift since 2016. Not so much how the vote was, but if you look at, for example, the Northeast, big part of Texas where a lot of the population is, all big blue arrows because the shift was from red to blue. Down south, big red arrows because the shift was from blue to red.
Okay.
Not in terms of the total vote, but in terms of what it was compared to what it used to be.
Okay.
So that right, talking about two separate things. What's the total vote? It's blue. But was there shifts in 2016? Absolutely. Same as in Miami.
What about from 2018?
Well, that I don't have. They were trying to compare presidential election to presidential election.
Okay.
Good question.
Because I know that Julian and Beto and folks like that had made some inroads in 2018. So I'm really, really hoping that more people who don't have a vested interest in how the vote comes out, but who are qualitative analysts will spend more time. And I think that, and I'm not knocking quantitative data. I'm not one of the, I don't pay attention to polls people, Greg.
Yep.
I'm not.
I do, so you don't have to.
But I think that we need to have a better understanding And that understanding is usually pretty limited because it's coming from partisan analysis. And people want to see whatever they want to see. But I'm not always sure that that's what's there. So do I trust what has been analyzed by the Wall Street Journal? I'd like to dig into who did that and figure it out, because it doesn't make any sense if people were anti-abortion before, but they voted for a Democrat and then they shift.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any sense since that area has been economically impacted and had they were hit by numerous hurricanes too in the area in the past, which they didn't recover from. So what has the economic downturn gone down to? I don't know the answer to this. And it's difficult for me to sit here since what I know about Texas, you could probably put in a thimble. So I can speak with a little more authority on things Puerto Rican, things Dominican, which are voters that you have along the East Coast of the United States. But my thought is that we need to do some soul searching and remember also that if these are communities where people tend to be monolingual, I don't know. What are they watching? Are they watching Spanish TV out of Mexico? Are they watching, they may not be watching Fox News. I don't know, but I'd like some answers to that.
Well, those are great questions. And of course, it's not that any of us have the answers, but I think that these are some of the important questions, we need to be asking. By Twitter, I'm going to send you that picture and the article that it comes from in terms of the ship, so you can see it later. So that's a place you could find it. And we're going to come up on our break fairly soon. But again, what I was hoping to do in asking you if you'd be willing to come on and talk to us is just to give people a flavor of the complexity of all of this. We haven't even counted all the votes. That's another reason why people shouldn't get such hot takes. True. I mean, as it may turn out, Biden flipped 5 states and, won millions more votes than Trump. And so in that sense, the election wasn't all that close. It certainly was in certain areas. But too many conclusions drawn on the night of the election itself and the day after are just wrong.
Yes. Look at what they just discovered in Puerto Rico. Did you see that news?
Boxes of votes that sort of showed up in some shrunken, crucial Waukesha County in Wisconsin, right?
No, in Puerto Rico.
In Puerto Rico, I know.
Their own Waukesha.
Oh, okay.
I mean, but there's 179 boxes of votes, not 179 votes, 179 boxes of votes.
Yeah. And, in looking at the Puerto Rican vote, I saw a real uptick in votes for this new party that just formed, the Citizens Victory Movement. And as a result of all of the demonstrations that kicked out Rosselló, and people would have been in the streets demonstrating against Wanda, but then COVID shut it down. And there was also an upsurge in the Independence Party votes have always been, minimal. They're very small as a result of a long history, and that I could talk about forever. But there was an uptick there too. So I'm seeing some major shifts happening on the island. And again, this is not mainland Puerto Ricans. I'm talking about people on the island. You have to remember that people who are on the island, a lot of them are people who could not leave and settle in Florida. You have a very different demographic within a nation and a subset that are diasporic is the word for it.
Right.
So whew,
It's complicated. We're coming up on our hour break,
okay.
but I wanted to thank you for coming on and just explaining some of the complexities. So, even if people don't remember every single thing you said, I think it's pretty clear that this is like a complex issue, and I hope people come away with understanding that.
Yes, there was one thing that, and we may have to hang on for the other side of the break, but I'd love for you to repeat what we actually discussed during the first break, but that the people listening didn't get to hear. But you described that in addressing the question of Puerto Rican statehood, that we're talking about absorbing a nation here, not just simply appending another state, that I thought spoke to the overall complexity of the entire Latino and Hispanic community just by breaking it down inside Puerto Rico. You're not even absorbing one monolithic block here in this one location. And I'd love for you to repeat and address. And if you've got the time and can hang on for just another moment, we'll take our break shortly.
I do, if you have me.
Of course.
We love having you.
Hour to you. But yeah, okay. Well, we'll set up for that. We'll take again. The break comes up in about a minute. So now we're killing time until we get you a time block enough for you to explain what you were telling us during the break. But yeah, we'll regroup again. Greg, I don't know if you have to run, but you're certainly welcome to stick around as well.
I'll stick around for a few minutes.
Terrific. All right. And okay, well, good. Here comes the music that alerts us that we're now about 30 seconds from taking that break. But this is an enormously important thing, and I'm glad you got across already the point that no, it's by no means a guarantee adding Puerto Rico as a state that we'd be looking at a permanent addition of 2 Democratic senators. They elect Republicans with fair frequency there. And I think your explanation of what situation exists on the island will help everyone understand why when we come back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've got Denise still standing by, Greg still hanging on because of the extraordinary nature of this morning's program. Thank you both for hanging on for so long and giving us so much of your time. I did want to get back to, among other things, there was a comment that in describing the nature of the community on the island in Puerto Rico, that by itself it was divided into so many layers of complexity. I think it like a fractal of the larger community. If you can come to understand what the differences are, and it should be simple to understand it. You look at the island, the size, the population. There are going to be differences. There was no chance that there was ever going to be a monolithic community occupying this entire island from all walks of life and all professions and all socioeconomic circumstances. And I think, the rest of us may need a gentle reminder of it, and I think you'll find that the rest of your fellow liberals and Democrats and progressives will understand very quickly, yes, it was foolish ever to think differently. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
I don't know, because I have been beating people over the head with Puerto Rico stuff at the East Coast since Hurricane Maria. So that's like 2 years.
Yes, okay.
And I get up every single morning, Greg can attest to this, and go into APR and put like a little mini Puerto Rico roundup every morning. That's my task. Starting at 4:30 in the morning is to collect things, and we still have. Listen, the journalist who is most responsible on Twitter for reporting Puerto Rico, most heavily followed person, David Daniel, right? Guess what? He's not Puerto Rican.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that'll make a difference.
And very few people follow. There are some people on Twitter who actually know what they're talking about. One of them does a lot of writing. A lot of her pieces come out via AP, Danica Koto. And she's on the island, okay? And so
Yes.
she's observing from there and reporting from there, but everyone is hung up on what David Vigneault has to report. And sometimes he's very good. I'm not knocking. I'm happy that someone's doing the work, but his understanding of Puerto Rican politics is very limited. And so he makes some major bloopers as well as, doing some good reporting. It is a complex issue. It's an issue that is really embedded in history, and you really have to know Puerto Rican history to begin to jump into it. And nobody's doing that kind of analysis, with the exception of there are a couple of things that have come out in the Miami Herald. They have a couple of reporters who are more cognizant of things Peruvian. And so people are just like, well, Puerto Rico should be a state. They'd be better off economically because they'd be a state and they'd get help and whatever. Yeah, they'd be 10 times poorer than the poorest state in the United States, which is Mississippi. I can't answer it. I mean, I try as much as possible not to put my 2 cents, as a young person. I was part of a movement that was very heavily independentist stuff. So I know a lot of the history vis-a-vis the history of the independence struggles, the Nationalist Party in Puerto Rico and whatever. But I try not to, I say over and over again, it's up to Puerto Ricans to decide. It's not up to New Yorkers, Florida Ricans, any of them to decide what happens in Puerto Rico. And the island is split down the middle. And the headlines on the statehood vote from the U.S. press pretty much was, there's a mandate for statehood. Well, there's not. When only 50% of the people show up to vote. Puerto Rico has very, very high voter participation rates, usually ranging, around 70%. So there was a drop-off. And there were other people who filled out ballots, but they put no Trump.
And that's it.
And then you have, again, missing ballots. And then you have a splintering among the status quo folks. There are actually 3 different factions that don't agree with each other.
No.
And basically here on the mainland, talk to progressives, the only name they know from Puerto Rico is Carmen Yulín Cruz, who was the mayor of San Juan, who did speak out against Trump, who then became the co-chair of Bernie Sanders' campaign, except guess who lost? I mean, badly. Carmen. Because the perception of Yulín on the island is very, very different from the media image that she was able to garner here. The only other Puerto Rican name we know in terms of politics is AOC, who frankly has not had a whole lot to say about Puerto Rico over the last 3 years. The one sort of workhorse congressperson who was born in Puerto Rico, is Nidia Velázquez. But even Nidia, you have to understand, is in New York City, in Brooklyn, and she's not going to have an impact on island politics because from an island perspective, everybody that's over here on the mainland are doing this. Doesn't make any difference whether your family is of Puerto Rican ancestry. There's a split there among many. I'm not saying all Puerto Ricans. There's no way you can say all Puerto Ricans anything. But yes, I would stress first that you're not talking about this itty-bitty little territory thing. You're talking about a nation, the same way you have nations in the Caribbean, like Jamaica, Barbados, and that nation status complicates the issue in a way that I think you're always comparing it to Hawaii. And that's a false comparison because by the time Hawaii was made a state, Native Hawaiians are, I don't know, 7% of the population, 9% of the population. Look at Alaska, So it's a quandary. I wish that there were more people who could speak authoritatively on this. The community group at the Coast, Latino Coast. You know who founded that?
I don't.
Me.
Oh, well, okay.
What would you know about it?
Because it didn't exist.
Yes, well, better than it exists.
So, no, but I put it up temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'm just a stand-in until I can get somebody to come in here and take it over.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote emails to three Latino on there. He goes, hi, do you want to take over this group? Please. I've been here now for a couple of years and have not gotten anyone, which says a lot about how many Latinos are there actually as part of I guess you call it the community. I'm not sure of the leaders, but people who are actively engaged. So I'm still there holding the bag.
Huh.
And that says something too.
That certainly does.
Yes, and it could say any number of things, including, my guess is just knowing some of the people who might consider themselves for such a role, probably pausing and saying, well, who am I to lead a community, right? It's just sort of a generalized problem. Right. I'm just facilitating a discussion here.
Them out and encouraging people to write articles and stuff. In Black Coast, twice a week, I have a whole segment of reporting from Puerto Rico and Afro-Latin America, which is a whole nother issue that we don't address. We pay a lot of attention to the Black community here in the United States, and we forget that one of the smaller percentages of where Africans brought to the New World from the slave trade was the United States. The bulk of the African population went to places like Brazil and other parts of Latin America and the Caribbean. And no one wants to touch that. Okay? And what does that mean in terms of those people who wind up here in the United States, and where do they fall on that analytical spectrum? And it's so touchy that even a lot of people with Hispanic surnames, who are academics, back off of that discussion. And it came up recently in this whole brouhaha over Korea, whatever, about Black voters and whatever, and Latino voters, and she's apology again. Oh my, lions and tigers and bears.
I could see where it would be a sensitive subject, certainly. And now I'm wondering whether any of the listeners who have commented along the way about their own takes on the Latino and Hispanic communities. Maybe they can pitch in and find somebody to relieve you on Latino Coast, certainly. It's just an interesting... that's so fascinating to me that you would set that up temporarily and then be reaching out to find somebody to take up the reins. And, I can understand many reasons why somebody might be reluctant to step into that role, even though, let's point out, and we're not asking you to be president of Latino America here. We're just saying facilitate a discussion. But I can see why somebody might, there are many reasons why they might be hesitant. But, if you want to facilitate a discussion from inside the community and insist that you be members of that community to do it, then I guess somebody has to present
I
themselves at
wanted
this
to,
point.
if you don't mind, I wanted to bring up one thing that
Sure.
I forgot to say about Puerto Rico.
Okay.
If you live in Puerto Rico, you're able to vote in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
And when you look at who lives in Puerto Rico, there are also people who retired to Puerto Rico, who are well-to-do and white. And guess what? They're Puerto Rican voters.
They are, yes.
There was a mass move to Puerto Rico when people were the Castro regime, and you're talking about people, I'm talking about the people who are economically well off.
Yes.
Yes, a number of them settled in Florida, but guess where a huge bunch settled?
Right, Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico. And then had an impact on funding certain elements who were Republican, because the ones that left Lean Fidel were not poor folks. You're not talking about the boat lift people, right?
Right.
You're talking about people who were, I'm not saying they were all wealthy, but they were certainly middle class. Okay. And they then become part of the Puerto Rican demographic and voter base. But more importantly, people who have ties to the ones that were in Florida. And they all supported for example, Marco Rubio. Yeah. So I've never seen anybody mention that, and I have to go and dig up if anybody's done any of that research on the island. I'm sure somebody on the island has. But again, a lot of the research on the island is not accessible, and in fact, a lot of the news from the island isn't accessible here because most of those tweets are in Spanish. And you have to remember that under 20% of Puerto Ricans speak English or read or write it.
Yeah, okay. That's lower than I would have guessed, I suppose, but it does seem plain.
And that 20% that is considered to be English speaking, for example, my godfather, who moved from Puerto Rico to the United States, worked in the Bronx for 35 years, and then retired back to Puerto Rico. Now, he's considered to be one of the people that speaks English. Okay. I will tell you that I went to his house almost every day to read the mail to him and translate it to him because his English was more like, "Hi, how are you?" And that's it. Okay?
Yeah, okay. Not necessarily a daily functioning English, but sure.
Right.
Okay.
Because he lived in the Bronx in a neighborhood where everyone speaks Spanish in Kingsbridge. So he didn't have to use English, and his job in a hospital as a maintenance worker, the entire staff was Spanish speaking. So, and he could watch Spanish TV, all day long.
Okay.
So, but he's considered to be one of the English speakers. So,
loose definition.
Forget, and sometimes I put tweets in Greg's APR and I try to put a little translation to the tweet, but most people are not going to take the time to read it. So if news out of Puerto Rico and two of the major papers don't publish an English language edition, and the one that does, El Nuevo Dia, only takes a couple of articles and translates them into pretty lousy English.
No. Yeah, well, that creates a difficulty for sure. You have to kind of do your own fact finding, and the infrastructure doesn't make it easy. That's for sure. I mean,
and who's going to do it?
Yeah,
because how many people actually give a darn about what's going on in Puerto Rico, except around time for voting?
Yeah, that we find that probably in every niche community that are approached for their votes at balloting time and resent it. But
who's the only major broadcaster who is partially of Puerto Rican ancestry? Not broadcaster, but whatever. I mean, like, really? Geraldo Rivera?
Yeah, that won't help much.
So,
yeah, well, we'll have to see if this there's another project, infrastructure development there. I guess one other question I happen to have one posed by one of the listeners, just sort of wondering. So, I guess if you approach this from a standpoint still, because this is where you'll find the interest, I guess, even though there's a broader project that should be taken up, the interest that you can pay for is around election time, and if that's the starting point for organization or outreach, what sort of approach do we take? Is it just the case that if you really want to reach communities wherever they live, that we need to be localizing that outreach? You need to have someone with real, actual, local, on the ground ties in the particular state or territory that you're looking at. That seems like obvious as something you'd want, but I don't know how difficult it is to actually to create that infrastructure. But is it just impossible then to effectively do outreach unless you have a local person helping with the work?
A local person initiating most of the work.
Okay.
If they get funded, a lot of this money that gets thrown away, sending money to Democrats in safe districts to battle against each other, which I think is a waste of time.
Interesting. Yes.
If you could do some of the kinds of things like the work that Stacey Abrams has been doing in Georgia, for example, right? With money behind it, hiring. I like the Acorn model, and I know Acorn got crushed.
Yes,
but Acorn was very successful in the work that they did because they were diversified. They were looking at housing, food, health care, whatever, across the board. But you have to have you have to have much more localized organizing. People that people in communities can trust is, somebody who's one of us as opposed to outsiders. I'm going to be making calls for Reverend Warnock in Georgia, but when I make those calls, I'm co-shifting into Southern. When I make those calls, now I don't have a Georgia accent, but I can definitely do Southern because I live in the South, and I know damn well that if I call and sound like a New Yorker from Brooklyn, it ain't happening.
Okay.
So take that, and you need someone who speaks Tejano from that region, as opposed to even somebody who sounds like they're, Nuyorican Spanglish or something. And yes, it's localized organizing, and guess what? It's not going to have instant results. Got to put that work in, and it has to.
Good reminder.
Not
parachute. That's a great reminder. Got to put the work in, and it's going to take time.
Yeah, people want to parachute in, put some ads on the air, and by and large, there were a lot of Latinos, Latins, Latinx, whatever, who did show up and vote for Democrats, and there was an upsurge in the youth vote from the numbers I've seen, and that's a good thing, but that's temporary, and can shift, and we need more representation. And as the woman who I read you the thing from said, we also need to see it in terms of journalism. The pundits that we refer to all the time, there are white pundits, there are white female pundits, there are black pundits, there are black female pundits. Name me the Hispanic, whatever, pundits, major writers for the Times, or this, or they have a spot on MSNBC, or this. You can't.
Yeah, we'll have to be giving some thought to how that develops. There's been a constant battle, really, inside, certainly in the progressive community, there's no shortage of people who have come to realize over the span of the last 20 to 30 years that we tend to fund our activists very differently than Republicans do. Of course, Republican results are mixed in some cases, and I guess there's a lot of worry about what might you be unleashing something that would grow beyond your control, which, you know, is actually not a bad thing, but it's not a great thing in the minds of funders. They love to have, you know, they sit on a pile of money because it gives them control over things, and the idea of spending their money on things that might grow outside of their control is anathema to them. But
right.
Republicans, well, of course, they've had terrible results with things that grew beyond their control that they've funded. That's true. You could point to that as a counter. But, yeah, it's very difficult. It's the problem of the last 20 to 30 years is finding people who are willing to invest in this infrastructure and trust it to grow productively without it pledging its allegiance to the funding source. And we know this to be a good thing.
My background is first and foremost. I didn't go into the scholarly anthropology thing until I was very old. And, you know, you need people who can go into people's homes, sit down, you know, have a cup of coffee, and not, you need people who do not, unfortunately, one of the negatives from a lot of people who I see who call themselves progressives, who immediately say things like, if someone's religious, they talk about flying spaghetti monsters, you know, and no, the comments of people who put religion down, how are you going to, if you can't sit in a church, you know, and if you can't understand that people have an altar in their house to La Virgen de Guadalupe and what that means, or that they celebrate the Day of the Dead. You know, there should have been Democrats putting up Day of the Dead altars all over the place in certain areas, because Day of the Dead's not a Puerto Rican thing or a Caribbean thing. It tends to be more Mexican and Afro-American. But so if you have, you know, I don't care if you're an atheist. That's all fine. But if you don't organize it, one.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we've got, I don't even know how to sum it up at this point, but large task ahead of us, certainly. That's at least we have that focus on that issue. That if the writing from, or the post-election analysis tells us anything, it's that there's an interest in and a hunger for finding ways to organize effectively going ahead as soon as the upcoming 2022 midterm elections. Not a lot of time to get it straight, but, not counting all the time we've wasted to date, I suppose.
If you put cadres on the ground starting within the next 2 months, and they seriously start doing some organizing in local communities, I'm telling you, there'll be a difference.
With that, you know, I want to thank Denise for her valuable time. She gave us a ton of it today.
Yes, and you too.
And a lot of very good information. So thank you for coming on and talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. We'll do it some more and hope to keep the interest up. I mean, this is a very good idea, Greg, and a purposeful one to try and continue to have this conversation so that we can move in from the wind-up of the election into organizing for the next one. Yes, as much fatigue as we all have, the reality is that the next midterm campaign is underway, and you can't put it aside and expect to get some results before we head to the polls again. You're absolutely right. Thanks so much to both of you, Denise in particular. I hope we'll get the chance to do this some more and find some more answers and fill in the blanks for people who are well-intentioned and would like to help and need only to learn enough about how they can do it constructively to get up and get things started. Thanks again.
Okay.
All right. Take care. And Greg, thanks for your extra time as well. we head towards our last break and then into our last segment. I'll wrap up the other news that's hanging out there, waiting for discussion. I appreciate everybody's time again. This is an ongoing project. Appreciate it, and we'll return in 2 minutes. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and I hope we have engineered the break correctly here, just because as I was trying to wind things up with Denise and Greg and see them off without actually just hanging up on them directly in the middle of our break music, well, things got a little bit twisted up in the wind here, but I think we're okay now and should be A-okay back on the air, and the episode is saved. Thanks, everybody, for your time. We've got a lot to discuss, I think, in this thing. And, you know, even though we gave a tremendous amount of the show over to the subject, it still kind of feels in the end like we gave, 15 seconds and 2 sentences to the thing, because, there, of course, I think the whole point of the episode was that there's, and maybe this presents a logistical problem, right? You say the whole point of the episode was to point out that we really couldn't describe the problem or the difficulties or the nuances within one episode, and so it's okay, I think we've committed to defeat right out of the box on this one, but you get the idea. And I think the starting point, at least for the audience today that isn't already intimately familiar with the issue, is like everything else, it's complex. It's a show about complexity and about how if you really dig down and try to understand everything you can about what's going on, you'll find that you need another, 2 hours, 5 days a week in perpetuity to figure these things out. I guess that gives us, maybe we can treat that as the segue over to the other issues swirling around the settlement of the election. And there are so many, but trying to explain, for instance, what can and can't happen with electoral vote slates, what can and can't happen in the electoral vote count in the Congress, and whether or not that should be considered. Is that when the transition is finally over with, when the electoral votes are counted, or is it earlier date? I noticed Armando on Twitter and arguing about, as he does, about everything with everybody on Twitter, whether December 14th ought to be considered the date at which everything is finalized. The votes of the Electoral College are cast, but do you wait until they're counted and certified on January 6th? Or is it enough to say that, look, it's not a secret ballot, the Electoral College. I mean, it's not like waiting until the votes are counted in the general election. The votes are openly cast, and of course we know for whom they will be cast, absent any crazy black swan events or faithless elector events or anything else that can disrupt the vote. And so it doesn't take much to verify that everyone has voted more or less as expected in all of the 50 states and other territories that are possessed of electoral votes and figure out who won, as opposed to waiting for the day on which the envelopes are opened and gavels are produced in order to make things official. Anyway, let's see. There's, I guess, another problem looking forward. This is an interesting twist on things. We've all been focused on the mechanics beforehand, but here is an interesting look at a problem. I didn't anticipate this, and I'm glad there are people thinking about this. The Daily Beast has this piece under the title of Biden World, that's the real world, Biden World fears Trump will bring, and here we censor it a little bit, weird crap to their inauguration. And what do we mean? We don't just mean that there'll be people walking around with, I don't know, Trump blow-up dolls or something like that. That would qualify as weird crap. They're, of course, using the dreaded S word in describing all of this. And by the way, this doesn't come entirely out of the blue. I did see an inflatable Trump thing on last Saturday, yes, when Trump was visiting the golf course locally. Although it turns out to be a novelty, like children's swimming pool flotation device, believe it or not. One of those inner tube type things, a swimming tube with an inflatable Trump on the front. But I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It was sticking out the window of a Trump, or a vehicle emblazoned with various Trump stickers, magnets, flags, etc., that was parading back and forth on the street in front of the entrance to the golf course, and sticking out the window was this thing. And it took a couple passes before I figured out exactly what this was. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me whether this was... I saw the Trump flags and everything, but I thought it was like the onion of Trump vehicles. Is this vehicle making fun of Trump? There's an inflatable Trump doll sticking out of the window. But no, they were entirely serious. So what is the weird stuff we're talking about here? Who's written it up? Sam Stein, he's weird in himself, and Scott Bixby, who I'm not as familiar with, but I'm sure is equally weird. Biden events in the COVID era, the subheader explains, have been sparse and distant by design, right? You know why. But if his supporters do not come to the inauguration, or perhaps space themselves out at the inauguration, that's a big question, right? I mean, the inauguration is about gigantic crowds packed pretty tightly together. That's the traditional measure of what inaugural attendance looks like, and that's Donald Trump's vision of what attendance looks like. And for him, large attendance at an inauguration is like television ratings. It's his measure of success. And we all remember, of course, him lying about the size of his inauguration crowd. And I guess we can all anticipate, what if COVID it will still be an issue, of course. What if it creates difficulties making the inauguration look like a traditional inauguration? He will, of course, be attacking from the sidelines. And it's fine that he's on the sidelines. I'm glad of that. That's the outcome we're all worried about, and we're glad we're going to get that. But what happens to Trump? Does he disappear? Do his people disappear? Does Trumpism disappear? And we've all read the articles and discussed it in the past about what ails the Republican Party isn't Trump himself, and the ism that they suffer from isn't Trumpism. It predates Trump. We all know about that. But what if they can attack this point? So again, we've only gotten through the subheader here. What if his supporters, Biden supporters, do not come to the inauguration or space themselves out? Planners worry Trump fans, not only will they attack that as a sign that Biden either is weak in his support, or, there will be a faction that says, see, I told you that he faked the election results. He has no supporters. But worse than that, they could actually physically fill the void that exists in the face of COVID restrictions, keeping attendance to a minimum. Let's see. Okay. Well, we'll have to go over to the pocket version of this thing because, I don't know, I must have hit my monthly limit with the Daily Beast. President-elect Joe Biden's team is confronting a logistical headache as it prepares for his formal inauguration on January 20th, 2021. How can you hold a mass-attended event in the midst of a pandemic while also preventing it from becoming a Trumpist counter-protest? You know that they're not afraid of packing themselves together, masked or not. At issue is a potentially combustible mix of complications owing to the likelihood that both COVID-19 and President Donald Trump's hurt feelings will persist into the time when Biden is scheduled to be sworn into office. They could lose interest between now and then, that's true. But assuming they don't, officials who have been involved in talks around the inauguration planning said public safety would be top of mind. Over the campaign, Biden consistently downscaled events or went entirely virtual to ensure no risk of COVID spread on his behalf. The expectation is that that mindset won't change for his inauguration. But how do you make that work? Inaugurals always require intricate planning. This one will be really a delicate balance, a delicate dance, they say here, to have that element of accessibility without risk, said Steve Kerrigan, who served as the CEO of the 2013 Presidential Inaugural Committee. That's got its own acronym. Did you know that? PIC, not POC. PIC is Presidential Inauguration or Inaugural Committee. Anyway, I cannot see a President-elect Biden, like Trump, putting narcissism or ego ahead of the safety of the people. And true, but then if you call the whole thing off, right, what stops you if you were a bunch of Trumpists for saying, they were trying, I see, the other day to organize a march in D.C. in support of Trump this Saturday, and they couldn't manage to put it together because they couldn't stop grifting, apparently. They were actually aiming at charging people somehow $3 to come to Washington, D.C. to march. They weren't going to carry you there, but I don't see how anybody pays $3 to show up in a city that you have free access to otherwise. But whatever, they're trying to fundraise or grift. But what's to stop if we abandon the field in order to put distance between ourselves and not facilitate the spread of COVID? What if the city is essentially occupied by Trumpists at the time? The questions being confronted by inauguration planners are now twofold. Returning to the article, how do you actually keep attendees away? And if wannabe revelers decide not to show up, will you be left with a mass gathering of Trump supporters in their place? What do you do if our people don't show up and his do? Asked one official involved in inaugural preparations. They probably will, and the last thing you want is a MAGA rally on the mall when Joe Biden is sworn in as president. Yes, that is the last thing I would want. I think Trump would want to make it as much of a, S show as possible. We got to get rid of the stupid morals clause that I imagine prevents me from saying these things. Planning an inaugural is an arduous affair. That is true. The event has massive crowds, including virtually all prominent political dignitaries, and requires large budgets and painstaking organizing. There are several stakeholders involved, but the general breakdown is that Congress handles the traditional ceremony that takes place on the west side of the Capitol building. Hasn't always been on the west side, by the way, but I think Reagan has sort of swapped things and set the standard since then. The west has the vistas and the balcony and the ability to set the whole thing up as a grand scene. But anyway, true. The actual ceremony itself is handled by Congress. And recent presidents, west side of the Capitol where recent presidents have been sworn in, as well as handling the luncheon afterwards. And do you remember, by the way, how well that luncheon went for Donald Trump? The picture I circulated the other day from when he actually won, or says he won the election and had just been sworn in as president. One of the most dour, sour-faced photos of both him and Melania that have been seen to date, taken about an hour and a half after he had just been inaugurated president of the United States. So you knew things weren't going to get better in the next 4 years. Anyway, so they handle the ceremony and the luncheon afterwards and the helicopter departure of the outgoing president. All of that handled by congressional personnel. The PIC, the inaugural committee, meanwhile, handles the customary church attendance. And did you know that was part of it? And White House tea between the presidents that takes place before the inauguration, as well as the parade back to the White House and the balls that take place after. So most of what we see, the parade afterwards, and then the video that we'll see on TV at night, unless we're VIPs showing up at one of these inaugural balls, is kind of what that's our total picture of the weekend's events in Washington, D.C. How about that, though? A White House tea between the presidents before the inauguration. You think that's happening this time around? I don't know. Congress hands out an estimated 200 to 250,000 tickets for seating around and in front of the Capitol, all the prime seating, of course. In 2009, an estimated 800,000 people were on site to watch the parade, while 40,000 people attended the 13 planned balls. Trump's 2017 affair was more sparsely attended, of course, you remember that, and thematically a bit different than most. After his speech, George W. Bush reportedly commented, another censoring moment, well, that was some weird stuff. One senior advisor who helped organize a recent inaugural said that the bipartisan bicameral congressional committee is not obligated to follow the incoming president's lead, but that it customarily does so. But there is added confusion about what might happen this year as Trump continues to contest the election results. So once again, remember that this is one of those bipartisan committees, a super committee, evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. And, rarely did it make much of a difference that was the case. But what do you do with the fact that one half of the congressional committee responsible for producing the showpiece, the crown jewel event of the inauguration, the ceremony itself, will be populated 50% of the population of the committee could be denialists, people who insist that Donald Trump won that election and Joe Biden didn't. I don't know who's on the inaugural committee these days, but I guess we can check that out. I mean, let's see. See if Google will tell us. And I mean, of course, the committee isn't active at all times. Naturally, it's something that will reconstitute itself only at the necessary moments. The Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies is the name of the organization itself. Let's just click on this here. And here they are. They've got a picture of themselves spaced in like COVID formation, so it's a fairly new photo. So they've definitely been working towards getting ready for this. All right, so here's your the makeup of the committee. It's a small committee, and I mean it's basically top leadership. Roy Blunt, who's the chair of the committee, Mitch McConnell, who should be tied to a chair in the committee, and Amy Klobuchar representing the Senate here, of course 2-1 because it's majority Republican there. And let's see, by January 20th, I suppose that's subject to change if the two Georgia Senate races go well and we have a 50-50 Senate. That'll be interesting. You can't split 3 by 50-50. We'll see how that comes out. Much to discuss about how the Senate is going to organize itself if those races do go well. Of course, only one of them has to go south in order for you to figure out exactly how the Senate will be organized. Over on the House side, who represents the House? Nancy Pelosi, of course, as Speaker of the House, and Steny Hoyer as Majority Leader, and Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Now, so let's see, a committee of 6, currently constituted 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. Perfect. And that's not the design of the committee. It's not like the super committee where the partisan breakdown was even by design. It's 3 representatives, and I guess they can change that too. But of course, while Roy Blunt is chair, there's no chance of changing the rules probably. But I'm sure they just said 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate, 2 from the majority of each, and 1 from a minority of each. So there you have it. What shall we do about XYZ affair? Shall we, now start spending money to prepare for the inauguration of Joe Biden or Donald Trump? And there may be 3 votes for each one. That'll be some trick to try to figure out as well. let me continue on with this article here. Where do we leave off? One senior advisor who helped organize a recent inaugural said that the bipartisan bicameral congressional committee not obligated to follow the incoming president's lead. They might not even agree on who is the incoming president. The current chair of the congressional committee, Senator Roy Blunt, said on Sunday that they were anticipating an outside, full-scale inauguration that's easier to scale back than to scale up. That's true. So I don't think they face a huge problem in terms of organizing the event if they wanted to scale it down. And I don't think anybody was planning on scaling it up. As of now, virtually no one believes that planners won't end up scaling back. One major fundraiser who has attended and donated to multiple Democratic inaugurations suggested that there, quote, won't be grace and favor seats, as he calls them, in prominent places behind the president-elect this go-around, with the crowded dais instead filled with socially distant cabinet officials and family members only. Another Democratic fundraiser predicted that the Biden team would push for a save and celebrate plan in which you save lives and do a mostly virtual event. That will be really interesting. Ordinarily, I would say that poses a tremendous problem. You know, we know what inaugurations are, quote, supposed to look like. And you face the State of the Union response problem, in my view here. The visuals and the audio that goes with delivering the State of the Union address inside the House chamber to a joint session, and with the applause lines and the raucousness of the situation and the visual effects of the setting always make the responses look, by comparison, cheap and thinly produced. No matter where you tend to set the thing, it's weird, it's silent, there's no response to what would otherwise be applause lines in the speech, there's no crowd, there's no ceremonial setting. There can be flags, of course, but, besides that, and a sometimes virtual law library behind somebody giving a speech from a otherwise nondescript podium, it tends to pale by comparison. On the other hand, I would say the people you need here are the creative team behind the production of the Democratic National Convention's roll call of the states. They somehow took a virtual event and made it visually interesting. The content was interesting. It meant something. The symbolism of going from state to state was obvious. The symbolism of having local people give local flavor to the roll call of the states made sense. I don't know if it's something that's reproducible in the inauguration sense, but, well, if anybody's going to come up with an idea that can address those problems, I would guess it would be whoever it was that very creatively found their way around the problem of having a virtual convention. So we need to be speaking to those folks. And of course, the Republicans totally failed in their ability to produce something similar. They didn't have enough of a heads up, I guess, about how to copy the way Democrats handled it. But their grasp of aesthetics, at least in the convention setting, and in a number of things. We've had 4 years, for instance, of watching how imagery emerges from the White House in photographic form. For a guy who's so interested in visuals and production and TV presentation, Trump has no sense of how to compose a picture. So, the comparison from the last 4 years, say, of whoever's doing the photography in the White House versus, what's his name? Is it Pete Souza, who was the photographer in the Obama White House? The quality of the imagery is just miles apart. Let me jump back to the article here. Stephanie Cutter, the veteran Democratic operative who has worked on past inaugurations, noted that there is no provision requiring Biden to even go to the Capitol to be sworn in. It's all ceremonial. You can do it in the Capitol Rotunda if you want. That's a thought. You just have to be sworn in by a Supreme Court justice. And I guess they'll take any one. Officials familiar with past planning said that the Secret Service and the National Park Service could, if asked, seal off the entirety of the mall and surrounding streets to make sure that crowds are kept far away. Not sure about the optics of that, but I see what they're getting at. They want to prevent a large-scale and visually obvious counter-demonstration to the inauguration. But unless you occupy that space with people, or otherwise, in this case, I guess, police and quasi-police type units forbidding people access to the National Mall during this inauguration, that might be the best option, and you'll simply have to cede to the Trumpers the fact that they will be able to get on television complaining about how dictator Biden kept them from running around on this particular patch of grass at this particular moment, and how tyrannical that is. Well, okay, so that's one option. Kerrigan noted that in 2009, Obama's team eventually tried to keep crowds away out of fear that they'd overwhelm D.C. infrastructure. And recall that did happen at some points, by encouraging them to hold neighborhood inaugurals instead. That's a thought. And then, of course, if you can get cameras and remote connections via satellite to enough of them, you can produce a television image that might work very well, like the convention did. The Biden campaign turned transition has told high roller donors, who, along with corporate sponsors, typically fund the inauguration festivities, that while plans are still highly fluid, there is a full understanding that any inauguration needs to put the safety of the public before any sense of tradition. It might not be a bad optic situation there if there aren't these gigantic corporate and high roller donations rolling in as well. But I don't think they're going to forgo all of that necessarily. There are a lot of conversations going on about that, and there certainly will be an inauguration in some form. We're just trying to think about how best to do that in the context of COVID. Kathy Russell, a member of the advisory council for the Biden-Harris transition team and former chief of staff to Jill Biden, told donors on a finance call on Tuesday evening, "It's always this balance, right, where he wants to do things responsibly and make sure that he's not putting anybody in harm's way. We're definitely turning our attention to that and giving that a lot of thought right now. But even with those provisions, fluid though they may be, in place, officials on Team Biden still worry that people will come to celebrate, thereby creating the type of mass gathering that public health experts have discouraged during the pandemic." One official noted that crowds gathered in D.C. and elsewhere organically on Saturday after networks called the election for Biden. We all saw that. "I think it's going to be almost impossible to keep people away from the mall," the official said. "If Saturday is any indication of how people want to celebrate, it's going to be hard. Part of the point is to allow people to participate in the cathartic nature of it, beginning the end of Trump. People are going to want to go. They also will likely show up, of course, Trump people, to heckle. In 2001, President George Bush was greeted with jeers, signs accusing him of thievery, and an egg thrown at his motorcade. Remember that? After the controversial recount in Florida put him in the White House. But Trumpism presents an entirely different dimension of potential disruptions. Already, Trump-supportive groups have signaled that they intend to organize in D.C. to protest Biden's win. This weekend, a rally is scheduled, although I understand it's been canceled, as I mentioned before, in D.C. to include pro-Trump women's group Women for America First, never heard of them, members of the far-right Proud Boys, and some white supremacists who marched in the 2017 Charlottesville rally. Oh, the fine people. Great. Another entity called the Stop the Steal Caravan, led by a host from conspiracy theory hub InfoWars, is driving from Austin, Texas, and should be intercepted, and plans to arrive in Washington on Friday. Maybe we can close all the gas pumps between here and there. The senior advisor who helped organize the recent inaugural said that it would be a personal surprise if Trump didn't encourage something similar for when Biden's inauguration was scheduled. It would be similarly surprising if Trump himself even participated. I could see no church, no invitation to tea. He'd bounce from the South Lawn and then go hold a rally to entertain the masses, the advisor said. That's probably my bet. I would be very surprised if he agreed to participate in the ceremonial part of the transition. That would shock me. Although it would be very interesting to see him go, Trump style, to try to interrupt the proceeding, bring his own microphone and debate the oath of office somehow. All right, time to wrap things up now and hand it over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let me thank once again Denise Alvarez and Greg Dworkin for hanging on for extra time today. It's definitely a discussion we're going to have to continue having in different forms. And lots left on the table today, so plenty to cover tomorrow as Greg returns for a Thursday show and into Friday. And then weekend comes. So in between now and then, of course, Justice Putnam will catch you up on all the things that I neglected in the very, very short term, including news again from overseas. As usual, let's see if we can't work that in after this short message.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Yeah, okay, the big news domestically that we can get to, that they will, the decapitation of civilian leadership, figuratively speaking, over at the Pentagon, not the Pentagon City Mall. It's not the Four Seasons problem all over again. And then overseas, Germany seeks a new deal with the United States under a Biden administration. Good thing, too, because we've got the guy to make it.